Welcome back to my channel. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. It's great to have you here. When I first arrived in the UK, I carried with me only the expectations of a traveler eager to see a new place, unaware that life had prepared something entirely different for me. The air felt crisp, carrying with it the mingling scents of roasted chestnuts from a nearby stall and the faint trace of rain that had only just passed. The streets were alive with movement, people in tailored coats rushing with purpose, others lingering by shop windows, couples entwined in quiet conversation. I thought myself destined simply to be an observer, drifting anonymously through these scenes, when fate saw fit to interrupt my solitude. It was not in a grand setting, nor in some orchestrated moment of beauty, but in the most ordinary place, just outside a small train station in the heart of town. There, amid the commotion of luggage wheels dragging across cobblestones and hurried footsteps echoing against old stone walls, I noticed a figure. At first, it was nothing more than a glance, one person out of many. Yet there was something about the way the stranger paused, as though time slowed for both of us. Perhaps it was the light, falling gently against their face, or the simple kindness of the eyes that met mine. Whatever the cause, I felt an unfamiliar stirring, a quiet pull that told me this meeting would not pass as quickly as the crowd might expect. Our introduction was clumsy, as most genuine encounters tend to be. A misplaced step, the slight bump of shoulders, followed by apologies that overlapped in the air. There was laughter too, soft at first, the kind that escapes when two people recognize the humor in chance itself. Words followed, hesitant but warm, as though each sentence was testing the ground before daring to move closer. We spoke of the day, of where we had come from, and soon enough of why we found ourselves in this corner of the world. I listened, and with every word I felt as though a new chapter of my week was quietly being written. It surprised me how natural it felt to share space with someone who only moments before had been a stranger. There was no effort in the exchange, no need to dress up my thoughts in clever disguises. Instead, there was a comfort, as though the rhythm of the conversation had been waiting for us all along. The voices of the crowd seemed to fade, leaving behind the sound of our laughter blending with the hum of the city. I caught myself studying the smallest details, the way their eyes sparkled when speaking of dreams, the way a smile lingered just long enough to suggest both warmth and mystery. Time, which moments before had hurried me along, suddenly slowed. I realized then that life rarely announces its intentions. It does not declare when something remarkable is about to begin. It simply happens in the turning of a corner, in the meeting of two paths that were never meant to cross and yet somehow did. And in that realization, a new kind of anticipation settled over me. I no longer thought only of the landmarks I would see or the sights I had planned to visit. Instead, I began to wonder how this person, so unexpectedly placed in my journey, would shape the days to come. We walked together for a while, the station fading into the distance behind us. The streets unfolded ahead, wet from the earlier rain, shimmering beneath the glow of street lamps. There was a quiet elegance to the evening, as though the city itself wished to witness the unfolding of this moment. Though we had only just met, I felt as though the week ahead had already changed, as if its meaning had shifted entirely. I did not yet know how deeply this meeting would affect me, nor could I predict the turns our story might take. But one truth became undeniable, that this day, which began like any other, had become the beginning of something I could not yet name but could already feel. And so, with nothing more than a chance encounter, a spark had been lit that would carry me into the rest of the week, forever altering the way I would remember my time in the UK. The morning after our first meeting carried with it a certain lightness, as though the air itself anticipated something more than the routine of a traveler abroad. London stretched before me, a city vast and proud, its streets echoing with centuries of history, yet alive with the voices of the present. I might have walked past dozens of cafes without a second thought, but on that day my steps slowed before a little corner shop, its windows glowing warmly against the pale sky. Inside, the soft clatter of cups and the murmur of voices promised comfort, and perhaps more than that, a sense of belonging in a place that was still so new to me. And there, as if summoned by fate itself, was the person I had met the day before. The sight was enough to send a ripple of surprise through me, though I struggled to mask it with composure. They looked up from a book resting lightly between their hands, and the recognition in their eyes was instant. A smile passed between us, small at first but growing, as though both of us had silently agreed that what began by chance might indeed continue by choice. The invitation was unspoken, yet understood. I joined them, and in that moment the simple wooden table between us became something more than a resting place for cups of coffee. It became a bridge connecting two hearts that had only just discovered one another. The air smelled faintly of roasted beans and sweet pastries, and somewhere in the background a song played, too quiet to catch the words, but steady enough to stitch the scene together. What began with polite remarks soon blossomed into laughter, the kind that comes unexpectedly, bubbling up until it fills the space with warmth. There were shy smiles, too, the sort that reveal more than words dare to confess, lingering just long enough to spark questions neither of us yet knew how to ask. The conversation wandered effortlessly, as though we had been rehearsing it for years. We spoke of dreams we carried quietly in our hearts, of places we longed to see, of the little things that gave color to our ordinary days. I found myself leaning forward, drawn not only by the sound of their voice, but by the sincerity it carried, each word a thread weaving us closer together. Outside, the city hurried on, unaware of the world that was unfolding within those four walls. People passed, taxis rolled by, and the rhythm of London life continued. Yet for me time had narrowed to the glow of that small cafe, the curve of a smile across the table, and the feeling that something rare was taking shape. Each glance held the promise of more, as though the universe itself conspired to keep us there, suspended in a moment too precious to be rushed. I noticed the little details, and they etched themselves into memory. The way they stirred their coffee absent-mindedly while listening, the quiet laughter that escaped when I confessed some clumsy detail of my journey, the gentle pause before answering a question, as though every word was chosen with care. These small gestures, almost invisible to the casual eye, carried with them a depth that words alone could never capture. And though the world outside the window seemed vast, the space between us grew smaller, softened by the comfort of shared presence. It felt less like a meeting of strangers and more like a reunion long delayed, as though life had been waiting for just this moment to draw two souls together. As the hours slipped by, the cups emptied, and the world beyond the cafe pressed forward with its demands, yet neither of us seemed willing to let the spell be broken. There was no dramatic declaration, no hurried promise of forever, only the quiet certainty that this day would linger in memory far longer than we might admit aloud. When we finally stepped back into the cool London air, the city no longer felt like a stranger to me. Its streets seemed softer, its corners warmer, as though they too had shared in our laughter and carried the echoes of it forward. And walking beside them, I knew that what began with coffee and conversation had already become something much greater, something I would carry with me beyond that day. It was then that I realized a simple cup of coffee could hold the beginnings of something extraordinary. The third day began with the promise of adventure, yet it was not the landmarks or the history of the city that stirred my heart most. It was the thought of discovering them with a hand clasped warmly in mine. There is a certain quiet wonder that comes when two people walk together, their steps falling into rhythm as if guided by an unspoken harmony. The streets of London, lined with centuries of stories etched into stone and brick, became the backdrop to something that felt at once timeless and entirely new. We wandered without haste, as though the city itself would unfold before us in perfect order. Each turn revealed something beautiful: an archway adorned with ivy, a square alive with music and laughter, a narrow lane where time seemed to pause. The grandeur of the buildings, the elegance of their facades, seemed almost secondary to the gentle brush of fingers intertwining, to the soft comfort of walking side by side. In every reflection we passed, in every window that mirrored us back, I caught a glimpse of what it meant to belong to a moment fully, without thought for what came before or what might follow. Conversation flowed easily, but often silence spoke louder. There were stretches where words fell away, and only the sound of footsteps remained, steady and reassuring. In those quiet pauses, I found myself studying the way their gaze lingered on the details of the city, the delight that spread across their face at each new discovery. To share in that joy was to see the world afresh, as though even the oldest street had been laid out for us alone. We stopped often, not out of weariness, but because each corner held something worth savoring. At one moment it was the sudden fragrance of fresh bread wafting from a bakery, pulling us toward its door. At another it was the strains of a violinist playing beneath a stone archway, his music rising to meet the soft echo of our steps. Each encounter became a part of the story, stitched delicately into the fabric of our day, and through it all their hand never left mine, a simple connection that felt stronger than any promise spoken aloud. The city, vast as it was, seemed to shrink around us, as though it bent itself to the size of our shared experience. I noticed how strangers glanced at us, sometimes with knowing smiles, as if they too recognized the unmistakable glow of two souls caught in the spell of discovery and affection. And perhaps that is the true magic of walking hand in hand, not only to see a place more closely, but to be seen differently within it, framed by the tender presence of another. The afternoon brought us to a quiet park where autumn leaves fell gently around us, carpeting the ground in shades of gold and crimson. We paused beneath an old oak tree, watching children play and pigeons scatter, as if the world itself were choreographed to remind us of its simple beauties. The weight of the week seemed lighter then, as though the hours stretched themselves kindly to give us more. I could not help but feel that the city, in all its history and grandeur, had softened its voice for our sake, whispering instead through rustling leaves and the brush of wind across our faces. As evening settled, the lamps began to glow and the streets filled once more with life. The golden light spilled across cobblestones, painting everything with a warmth that matched the quiet beating of my heart. We walked slower then, reluctant to let the day slip into memory, as though each step might delay the inevitable passing of time. Yet even as the night drew near, I felt no sense of loss, for what had been gathered in those hours, the laughter, the silences, the shared wonder, was already etched too deeply to fade. And as we finally stopped to take in the city spread out before us, its towers rising against the fading sky, I knew that this day, more than any other, had shown me what it meant to be truly seen and to walk through life, if only for a time, not alone but together. The fourth day arrived with skies heavy and uncertain, as though the heavens themselves could not decide whether to bless us with sunshine or burden us with storms. We stepped into the morning unaware of what the hours would bring, but perhaps that is the very charm of life. It hides its most meaningful moments behind the veil of chance. The city seemed quieter, its usual bustle softened by the expectation of rain, the air cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of earth stirred by the coming storm. We walked close, speaking in low tones, our words mingling with the rhythm of our steps. Then, without warning, the sky released its weight, and a sudden downpour fell upon us. The streets emptied in an instant, people scattering to doorways and awnings, laughter echoing as umbrellas opened like sudden blossoms. We had only one between us, small and worn, its edges frayed, yet it became our sanctuary. Beneath its narrow shelter we pressed closer, our shoulders brushing, the world beyond fading into a blur of silver rain. There was something curiously intimate in that confinement, something both fragile and unshakable. I felt the warmth of their arm against mine, the steady beat of their breath mingling with the cool dampness of the storm. The rain was relentless, striking the umbrella with a drumming force, yet beneath it we found a stillness as though the world outside could no longer touch us. It was in that space, so small and yet infinite, that something deeper began to grow. We laughed at first at the absurdity of two souls caught unprepared, our shoes splashing through puddles, our hair damp despite our best efforts. But the laughter soon gave way to quietness, to glances that lingered longer than before, to a silence that said more than any words could dare. I looked at them then, really looked, and saw in their eyes not just the reflection of raindrops, but the glimmer of something that reached far beyond a single week. We found refuge at last beneath the arch of a stone bridge, the water cascading around us in sheets that shimmered like falling glass. The sound was deafening, yet in the hollow of that shelter our voices felt softer, as though meant only for each other. They spoke of moments in life when everything changes without warning, when what seems ordinary transforms into something unforgettable. And as I listened, I realized this rain, which had at first seemed an inconvenience, had drawn us closer in ways no clear sky could have achieved. Time stretched strangely there. The world hurried on above us, carriages rolling, footsteps rushing, but we remained suspended, held by the gentle insistence of the storm. Every droplet that fell seemed to echo the unspoken promise forming between us, that what we were discovering was not as fleeting as the rain, but something that might endure long after the storm had passed. I watched them tuck a damp strand of hair behind their ear, and in that simple gesture felt a tenderness I could not have anticipated. There was no declaration, no dramatic vow, only the quiet certainty that had grown with each day and was now sealed by the rain itself. To share shelter is to share vulnerability, and in that vulnerability I found not weakness but strength, the strength of connection, of trust, of something fragile yet profound taking root. When at last the storm began to ease, the world emerged refreshed, streets gleaming with reflected light, the air sharp and new. We stepped back into the open, still beneath the same umbrella, though now it seemed less a shield and more a bond, a symbol of what had unfolded in those hidden minutes. The rain had cleansed not just the city, but the space between us, leaving behind a clarity that no sunlit day could have revealed. As we walked on, hand brushing hand beneath the dripping trees, I knew with quiet conviction that this day had given us more than just a memory. It had given us a promise, whispered not in words, but in the rhythm of rain falling around us. The fifth day did not arrive with the lightness of the ones before it. From the moment the morning broke, there was a subtle shift, as though the air itself carried an unease. Perhaps it was inevitable, for no story unfolds without shadows, and even the sweetest beginnings must be tested by moments of doubt. What had felt so effortless the days before? Our laughter, our shared discoveries, our quiet companion. Ship suddenly seemed fragile, as though it might shatter with a single word spoken too hastily or a silence held too long. It began with something small, as misunderstandings often do. A glance misinterpreted, a phrase taken differently than it was meant. At first, it seemed trivial, a matter easily smoothed away. Yet words have a way of lingering, of carrying weight when they strike the tender places of the heart. Where there had been warmth, a coolness slipped in, subtle at first, but unmistakable. I found myself questioning what had been so certain only a day before, wondering if I had imagined the depth, if perhaps the connection I cherished was only a passing illusion born of circumstance and chance. We walked together still, yet not as before. The rhythm of our steps no longer matched. Our hands no longer found each other without thought. The city, which had seemed to bloom around us on the earlier days, now felt distant, its beauty muted by the disquiet between us. I looked at them and longed for the ease of our first conversations, the unguarded smiles across the café table, the shared wonder beneath the rain. Yet in their eyes I caught a hesitation, a guardedness, as though they too wrestled with unspoken questions. There is a particular ache that comes when closeness falters. It is not loud or dramatic, but quiet and piercing, slipping into the spaces once filled with joy. I found myself caught between pride and longing, unsure whether to reach out or to retreat. And in that uncertainty, the hours seemed longer, stretching with the weight of what might be lost. A single week is such a brief span in the course of life, and yet in that week I had felt more than I could explain. To think it might unravel before it had fully begun was almost unbearable. As the day went on, the distance between us grew. Our conversations thinned, our laughter disappeared. The silence between us was no longer comforting but sharp, a reminder of what was slipping away. I questioned myself endlessly. Had I been too open, too hopeful, too quick to believe in something real? Or was it simply that one week was never meant to carry the weight of something lasting? The city, indifferent to my turmoil, carried on. People passed by with easy smiles. Couples strolled arm in arm. Life unfolded as though nothing had changed. But within me there was a storm every bit as heavy as the one we had weathered the day before. And yet, even in the uncertainty, even in the ache, there was something undeniable. The fact that the distance hurt proved its significance. One does not grieve the loss of what was never real. One does not feel the sting of silence unless the voice of the other has already become too dear. And so, though the misunderstanding cast its shadow, it also revealed a truth I had not fully admitted, that in the span of only days my heart had bound itself more tightly than I thought possible. As evening approached, I walked beside them, still hoping for a word, a glance, some sign that the thread between us had not fully unraveled. Though the doubts pressed heavily, there remained within me a quiet flame of belief, fragile but unextinguished. For love, even in its earliest form, carries within it both joy and trial, and perhaps the measure of its worth lies in whether it can endure the moments of distance as well as the closeness. And so, beneath the fading light of that uneasy day, I understood that this story, whether brief or lasting, was already written upon my heart, and that even doubt itself could not erase the truth of what I felt. The final days came more swiftly than I had ever imagined, as if time itself had conspired against us, rushing forward when I would have begged it to slow. From the beginning, I knew this story had its limits, 7 days, no more. Yet knowing did not prepare me for the weight of it, for the quiet ache that grew as the hours slipped away. What once felt like the promise of endless discovery now carried the heaviness of a question neither of us dared to answer too quickly. Was this merely a fleeting chapter, or the beginning of something that might endure beyond the confines of a single week? On the 6th day we walked together as we had before, but every street, every corner, every fleeting moment seemed to whisper of farewell. The city was alive, yet for me the world had narrowed to the nearness of their presence, to the sound of their voice, to the way their hand still sought mine as though reluctant to let go. We tried to keep the hours light, to laugh as we once did, to speak of the sights around us, but beneath it all lay the unspoken truth, that soon there would be distance not just in our steps, but in our lives. The misunderstanding of the day before lingered faintly, like a shadow on the edge of sunlight, yet in its place came something steadier, more certain, for what is tested and survives often emerges stronger. We spoke more quietly now, more honestly. There was no longer time for hesitation, and so our words carried a weight they had not held before. We confessed the fears that came with such sudden closeness, the doubts of how 1 week could possibly give shape to something as vast as love. And still, as the hours passed, I found myself believing that perhaps it could. The 7th day arrived with a tenderness I had not expected. The air was cool, the sky soft with the pale light of morning, and there was a stillness in the streets that seemed to echo the stillness of our hearts as we faced the truth we could not escape. It was a day both heavy and beautiful, for it demanded a choice: to let this remain a memory, sweet but fleeting, or to carry it forward into the unknown, into a future we had not planned, but both longed for in secret. We spent those last hours walking slowly, as though each step could delay the inevitable. The city revealed itself to us one final time, its bridges and towers standing as witnesses to our story. Every glance, every smile, every shared silence felt like a promise pressed into the fabric of the day. And as the time of parting drew closer, the question grew louder within me. Could I walk away and call this merely a passing story, or would my heart betray me by insisting it was the beginning of forever? When the moment finally came, there were no grand speeches, no dramatic declarations. Instead, there was the simplicity of truth, spoken softly, almost fearfully, as though the very air might break it apart. We admitted that what we had found was too precious to be dismissed, that the bond forged in such a short span of time had rooted itself too deeply to be forgotten. There was uncertainty still, yes, and distance lay ahead like an unwritten chapter, but there was also resolve, a willingness to try to hold on, to see where this story might lead beyond the narrow bounds of a single week. And so the choice was made, not with certainty of the future, but with faith in the present. It was not goodbye, not entirely, nor was it yet the certainty of forever. It was something in between, fragile yet luminous, the kind of moment that binds itself to memory and refuses to fade. As I stepped away at last, carrying the weight of both joy and longing, I knew that whatever became of us, this week had altered me forever. And with that final day, I understood that some stories do not end with farewells, but with the quiet, trembling hope of forever. Thank you for walking with me through these 7 unforgettable days in the UK, where love and life met in the most unexpected ways. If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to hit the like button. It truly helps keep these stories alive. And if you're new here, subscribe and join me for more journeys filled with love, hope, and discovery. Until next time, may your own story find its forever.